Hello everyone, welcome back to another video, or welcome if you are new to my channel. I'm back with another true crime video. I really enjoyed making the last one, and so I've been diving into another story, another case for the past couple of weeks. I wanted to get this filmed last week, but I ended up getting ill, so I do apologise if I sound slightly nasally still. I've got a little bit of congestion left, but it's almost gone, so I felt like it might be safe to film now. Today's case is about the disappearance of Kim Wall. It's spelled like wall, W-A-L-L, but it's pronounced Wall. She was born on the 23rd of March 1987 in Sweden, near the Sweden-Denmark border, and both her parents were journalists, so she had quite the childhood, having two journalists as parents, looking for stories. It was quite adventurous, and so naturally she fell in love with this and wanted to become a journalist herself. She said that she wanted to see how the world works and hopes that she could learn enough to make a difference in the world by reporting on stories that are important and give a voice to the voiceless. And she did. She achieved so much before she was 30 years old. She wrote about everything and everyone that she felt was important and worked for many major publications such as Harper's, The Guardian, The New York Times, Foreign Policy, Vice, Slate, Wired, South China Morning Post, The Atlantic, and even Time magazine. And her work has been translated into several different languages around the world. She has travelled far and wide, and she's even been to really dangerous parts of the world. She went to Sri Lanka to report post-war efforts, a pretty dangerous time to be going somewhere. She went to Haiti after an earthquake, and she even visited North Korea. So that just shows her kind of character. She was so determined, brave, almost fearless, to go to these dangerous places alone to report what she considered to be important stories. She even visited a nuclear waste site to do reports on that. So yeah, she was just a very fearless, bold person, and just wanted to live her life to the fullest, and she absolutely did. She got two master's degrees, one being from the Columbia School of Journalism. She was a United Nations Press Fellow. She was learning Mandarin. She briefly went to the University of Beijing, and she went to college in London. So she was just almost an unstoppable force. She just did whatever her heart called her to do, and just dived right in and went for it. One of Kim's uni friends said that one of her strongest memories of Kim is that they were both living in Delhi, India together at one point in time, and Kim said to her and her friends, "I know of this really great Korean restaurant I want to take you to," and they were all like, "Yeah, sure, let's go," thinking it's gonna be some fancy, bougie establishment. And that evening she's like, "Okay, follow me," and she takes them to what's considered to be like quite a rough part of Delhi. It's not where most people would venture to go, and they were a bit apprehensive, walking through this kind of dangerous area. But Kim was like, no, I promise you it's great, keep following me. So they turn into what looks like a really run-down building, go upstairs, and inside is this quaint, cozy hidden gem of an immigrant-run Korean restaurant. And they said it really was the best Korean food they'd ever had, and it was so charming in there. Like, you never would have known that this place existed if you didn't dare venture down these streets. she didn't seem to have a lot of trouble selling stories. Kim had even gone through several courses like hostile environment training so that she could be trained on what to do in event of a car accident, or how to provide aid, and what to do if she was being held hostage or kidnapped or in a big mob situation. I guess that adds to her bravery. She feels like, I've done the necessary preparations to be able to handle almost anything. But despite all of her travels to, what could be considered very dicey parts of the world, and being in potentially dangerous situations, her final story would end up being pretty much in her own backyard, in an area that's considered extremely safe, Copenhagen, in summer of 2017. Kim is living in Copenhagen with her boyfriend. She loves the city, work's going great, everything in her life is running smoothly. Then her and her boyfriend both get an offer of a job opportunity in China, and they decide that they're gonna go for it because, she's been learning Mandarin anyway. She's not worried about communication being a problem, and they were both really excited at the prospect of moving to China. So they tell their friends and they plan a leaving party. But she did say there's one more story she wanted to get before she leaves, because it was in Copenhagen. And that was the story of Peter Madsen, who was somewhat of a local celebrity. He was kind of considered like the Elon Musk of Denmark, because he was hand building submarines and rockets. He was described as eccentric and a genius inventor. I mean, I don't know if he's actually an inventor, because he didn't invent the submarine, but he was building his own. His vision was to make Denmark famous for being the home of civilian homemade rockets without funding from the government. His philosophy was, if someone wants to be an astronaut and build a rocket, they shouldn't have to wait for funding or permission from the government to do so. However, he didn't start with rockets, he started with submarines, and he was a complete amateur and was pretty much self-taught when it comes to engineering and building things. But he was very charismatic, and he would give TED Talks inspiring people to pursue their dreams and not limit themselves. And because of his charismatic way, it caught people's attention, quite a lot of attention, and so naturally he caught Kim's attention too, and she thought that he was worthy of a story because he was coming across as so inspiring. And in fact, she pitched this story to Wired magazine, and they said that they were interested and would definitely buy the story from her, so they kind of gave her the green light to go ahead and report on this. So she reaches out to Peter Madsen requesting an interview, which they arrange for August 10th, 2017. She goes to meet him at his workshop, and they have a 2 to 3 hour interview, after which she turns to her and says, "Do you want to take a ride on the submarine? It's calm waters tonight, and it would be a perfect time to go down in it, and you could take pictures, and it can go along with your story." She's like, absolutely yes. She sees this as an amazing opportunity for her reporting and to really experience a homemade submarine. So she goes back home to her boyfriend and says, "Hey, look, this guy's offered to take me down in his submarine tonight. I know it's the going away party, but don't worry, it will only be for a couple of hours, and then I'll be back and we can party." And he's like, "Yeah, okay, that sounds really good, like a great opportunity." She didn't have any concerns about being alone with him. So at 7:30 p.m, she goes back to meet Peter, and the both of them get into the sub and make their descent as she's boarding the sub, she texts her boyfriend saying, "I'm still alive, by the way, but just going down now. I love you." That was the last thing she said to him. So they submerged to around 20 feet below the surface, and they're only expected to be gone for a couple of hours max. However, 10 PM comes around and there's still no sign of the sub, Peter or Kim. Her boyfriend said that he felt slightly concerned, but figured Kim probably just got carried away with asking him more questions and taking pictures, and decided to leave it a bit longer, thinking she'll probably be back soon. But when he next looks at the clock, it's 2:30 AM and Kim is still not home. At this point, he calls the Coast Guard and reports the sub, which is called Nautilus, as missing, and that Kim and Peter are the only two on board. So now the Coast Guard are out looking for this missing submarine. As the sun comes up on August 11th, 8 hours into their search, the submarine was spotted from a nearby lighthouse in Crew Bay, the southern area of Copenhagen. It was at the surface, and Peter is stood out of the entrance tower atop the submarine, and he's managed to radio in to the Navy and said, "Everything's fine, we just had some technical difficulties and that's why they went missing." Peter ends up getting picked up by a fisherman, and as soon as he does get picked up by this fisherman, the Navy are now being bombarded with calls saying that the sub is sinking. Even though it looked fine 2 minutes ago, the sub is now sinking. Peter didn't give any indication in his calls to the Navy that this could be possible, and he didn't express any kind of concerns about this, but now the Nautilus is sinking fast. The Navy didn't seem too surprised that the sub was sinking. They were concerned, but they weren't surprised, and that's because when Peter announced that he was building a submarine, the Navy got in touch with him and said, "Let us take a look at your building plans for this sub, because we want to make sure it's safe, and we'll help you with it. We'll help you make it as safe and well built as it can be." And when the Navy commanders took a look at his building plans, a lot of them warned that it's too heavy and that it will likely sink one day. However, Peter didn't heed their warnings because he felt like he knew what he was doing, and he just continued along with his project, doing it his own way despite extremely experienced Navy engineers telling him it's too heavy. So at this point, let's give a little bit of a background about Peter. He had a very turbulent childhood. He was born to parents Carl and Annie. Annie was 36 years younger than Carl, and Carl was very harsh and cruel as a parent and husband. The way he communicated with his children was by beating them, basically, whether that was to get something out of them or to drum something into them. Beating them was his answer, and he basically gave no affection whatsoever. Peter likened his childhood to growing up under the direction of a concentration camp commander, so not a great environment to be in. And eventually, when his parents divorced, he was actually forced to go and live with his dad instead of his mum, which was very tough. He was forbidden to talk to his mum, and she was the nicer parent out of the two, so he was just left with this cruel, militant type parent who gave beatings and no love. And it seems that perhaps Carl also badmouthed his mum in front of him a lot, because Peter would later say things like, "I didn't want to live with her anyway, she was as stupid as a cat." And his perception of her was someone who's very weak and stupid, possibly because he never saw her fighting back also seems as if he learned manipulation from his dad, because in later interviews and documentary footage, he would explain that he knows how to say things in just the right way to get what you want out of people, or when not to say things, when to keep quiet, because you don't want to give people too much information. Otherwise, people can tell you no, or you could get yourself into trouble. And the way he would speak was almost poetic, like a word salad, you know, the confusing type of overly elaborate speaking, which comes across as somewhat charming and quirky and intriguing, but it's manipulation. And he was a larger-than-life character. He had a big ego on him. He always wanted to be the center of attention and in control. Hence his obsession with rockets, which he says started when he was young. He would always dream about going to space by his own hand. He did a bit of engineering studying, but is mostly self-taught. He obviously started off building submarines first, and his first submarine that he built was called Freya. It was 20 feet long and could only fit 2 people inside. Then he built one slightly bigger called Cracker, which was reminiscent of a World War II German submarine and could fit 3 people inside. Then his latest was Nautilus, the one he's currently in, that can fit about 8 people. Once he had these 3 submarines under his belt, that's when he started to look to the stars. And in 2008, he co-founded the company Copenhagen Suborbitals. He said he wanted to be able to go into space with no astronaut training, and to build the rocket out of things you could find in your local warehouse. So he starts crowdfunding his project, and because of his larger-than-life, charismatic, almost cartoon-like personality, he piqued the interest of quite a few investors. But a lot of the company was self-funded. The majority of workers were either interns or volunteers, not getting paid anything. But they were so inspired by his project that they just felt they wanted to be a part of it, even if they didn't get paid, because they felt like maybe they were going to make something historical happen. You know, the first civilian rocket in space, kind of a dream project for any engineer. But at some point, some drama went down at Copenhagen Suborbitals between Peter and the co-founder, and Peter decided to leave the company and go it alone. Still on the same lot, and he just started building his own rocket, which didn't go very well because he was alone, and the truth is he didn't have enough knowledge to get it done, and he was notoriously bad at working with others. He was a bad communicator, and because of his narcissistic personality traits, he was prone to creating drama if he didn't feel listened to or if he didn't get his way. So that's just a bit of background about Peter Madsen. So back to the present moment, Peter's been picked up by a fisherman and taken to shore. The sub has sunk, and there's still no sign of Kim. Journalists and media were waiting ashore for him to get the scoop and see what's going on. They ask him if he's okay, and he just turns and gives them a thumbs up. The Navy is obviously watching all of this happen, and they're very suspicious about the sinking of the sub. Apparently submarines don't just sink on their own, especially when it's not fully submerged, as it wasn't when they found Peter. It seems like the sub was sunk intentionally, which is very odd because this is Peter's pride and joy project that he's worked on for years. surface. So if he sunk it himself, why would you do that unless you're trying to hide something? As Peter is taken to a car after his rescue, someone asks him, "Where is Kim Val?" He says that he came up to the surface last night and dropped her off at about 10:30 p.m, but Kim never returned home. Eventually, CCTV footage from a local bar that has extensive views over the harbour were combed through, and there was absolutely nothing to show that the sub had ever surfaced, or anyone of Kim's description walking along the harbour. Nothing. So on the next day of August 12th, Peter Madsen is arrested and appears in court for like a preliminary hearing because his story just isn't adding up. On August 13th, the sub was brought up from under the water, drained, and authorities searched the vehicle. It's reported that there was a strong smell of blood inside. There were pieces of what seemed like flesh in the submarine, and Kim's jacket was still present. So they know Peter's not telling the truth, and now they need to work on getting it out of him and trying to find Kim. The Navy starts searching the harbour to no avail because it's such a large area of water to search through. About 10 days into their search, there's a report of a washed up body nearby, but it's not a full body, just a torso. No head, no limbs, just a torso. The police run DNA on the torso and discover to their horror that it does belong to Kim Val. So Peter's been caught out in a lie, and now his story obviously changes. He confesses the truth. He says he was afraid to tell the truth at the beginning because Kim died accidentally from the entry hatch hitting her on the head. And the hatch is very heavy, it weighs like 50 kilograms or more, so the impact would have been fatal if you got hit on the head with this hatch. And this is how he claims that she died, and he panicked and felt really awful about it, and then took it upon himself to bury her at sea and give her a funeral. However, he does not mention why he dismembered her to do that, so it's still sounding very sus. There were also markings on the torso indicating torture and stabbings. Even though the authorities knew he was lying, in order to prove that he was, they would have to explain how Kim died, which means they need to find the rest of her body. But finding body parts in such a large amount of water is almost impossible. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. And with the current of the water, items get dragged quickly. So eventually they had to bring in the help of an oceanographer to help them understand just how quickly things move underwater. And with his help, after 56 days of searching, they end up finding her legs and her head. I should also say that all the body parts found were in plastic bags and weighed down with lots of metal. So it was clear that they were trying to be sunk and not found. guess this is the reason that he made up the Hatch story hitting her on the head, because he didn't want her family to know that it took her 10 minutes of suffering before she died. So he made up the Hatch story because it would have been a quick, sudden death, which might have been easier for her family to swallow. The prosecutor's like, okay, well, if that's the case, why would you cut her up into pieces? To which he responded, I had a big problem. What do you do when you have a big problem? You cut it up into small pieces. I'm sorry. What? That's gotta be one of the most psychotic lines I've ever heard. Prosecutors tell him straight up they don't believe him. He's lied twice now about what's happened to Kim, and they wouldn't put it past him to be lying again. So now it's during the trial and they're digging into Peter. The authorities start searching through his emails, his computer and his text messages, only to find a darker side of Peter, which he has managed to keep fairly well concealed from the public. Peter was actually married, but he claims they are in an open marriage, and he would frequent BDSM parties, which in and of itself, totally fine, right? Two consenting adults in an open marriage, they enjoy BDSM, no problem. However, on his computer they found multiple videos of snuff films. If you're not familiar with a snuff film, it's basically a video of a woman being assaulted and tortured, and it ends in their death. And he had lots of this on his computer. He also asked a colleague that he worked with if he'd ever heard of a specific website. I don't know what that website is, I'm not sure it was ever actually mentioned, but he said it was a website where you could view these kinds of images, you know, of women being hurt. And he said it in such a nonchalant way to this co-worker, you know, it was kind of flippant, like, oh, have you heard of such and such? So the colleague responded no, but he didn't take it too seriously because Peter was a quirky character and he was just like, oh, he's just saying some stupid stuff. Like, he just didn't pay attention to it because he'd never heard anything like this before or since. And then a woman that he worked with actually admitted that they had an odd exchange of messages once. She was reluctant to come forward with this information initially because it sounds odd from her end as well, but I guess it was just her humour. She texted him jokingly saying, you need to send me a little death threat or something so I can get my work done faster. I need some pressure, I'm working so slowly. To which Peter replied, okay, I'll tie you up in the Nautilus and pierce you with skewers. Then my knife will come out and I will look at your throat, looking for the artery. I have a murder plan and it's going to be a great pleasure. He also asked this same woman if she wanted to go on a ride in the submarine with him, just the two of them, on August 11th, which would be the day after his interview with Kim. So it appears like he had always planned to get a woman on their own on his submarine to live out these sick, twisted snuff film fantasies that he's got going on, and he arranged it with this co-worker, but it just so happened that Kim got to him first and he saw his opportunity to take her down instead. This work colleague was very shaken when she learned what happened to Kim because she realised this is what he was planning to do to me, and this could have happened to me. she eventually did, because, you know, she realised this is big and I need to tell them everything. Peter underwent a psychiatric evaluation that was read out in court, revealing that he has a severe lack of empathy, remorse, and sense of guilt, and he relishes in watching violent videos. The psychiatrist also noted that he was personally deviant, narcissistic, unconcerned, and lacking regret. So, basically a psychopath. On April 25th of 2018, after 11 days, the court reached a verdict and Peter Madsen was sentenced to life in prison. After he was sentenced, he had one final change in his story, where he does admit to killing him, but he doesn't give any details as to what happened. He said, "I didn't go around living a wonderful life and suddenly bang, I got evil. Something made it happen. This is my confession. What the fuck happened? How can it be a mystery to you guys that good comes in a package with bad? There aren't heroes and bad guys. There are just humans, and under the right circumstances, under the right kind of pressure, under the right mistreatment, you can make people do just about every horrific thing to each other that you can think of." You can see the narcissism in that statement, so much of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, part of what he's saying there is true. You know, we see it in all these true crime cases that most serial killers, or just killers, come from a messed up childhood. And so, yes, that does create monsters. Monsters create monsters. For the most part, there's obviously some exceptions, but unfortunately that does seem to be a regular thing, a regular pattern. It doesn't excuse their behaviours though. On October 20th of 2020, after 30 months in prison, Peter attempted an escape. He managed to build a weapon in jail. He threatened the guard to let him out and made a run for it. It was very brief though, because he got caught literally just outside of the prison and ended up sitting on the grass with officers surrounding him, holding him at gunpoint, and they eventually escorted him back inside. Officers that worked on this case question whether this was his first crime, because it's so rare for such a violent crime to be someone's first offence. So it's very possible that he has committed other abusive sexual crimes before and managed to get away with it, which is a horrible thing to think. Unfortunately for Kim Val, who was a bright, intelligent and inspiring young journalist who was just doing her job, you know, it was her job to find a story. She heard about Peter Madsen, thought he was interesting, thought he was inspiring even, that he was worthy of a story, and ended up becoming the victim of a self-absorbed